Today in business studies we're going to look at some of the influences on how businesses run. One of the first things I want to talk about is globalisation. Globalisation basically is the process by the world has become so interconnected that businesses today, it's pretty easy to run a global business from your own home using internet-based technology or communications technology. So globalisation and communications has revolutionised how businesses have done. Basically, this leads to increased competition. You're not just competing with businesses in your own location, but businesses from around the world. Customers are becoming much more savvy about buying things online from overseas if they can feel they can get a better deal. This has basically led, as an unintended consequence, to the erosion of difference between products and services. People tend to buy very homogeneous things from around the world wherever they are. In terms of communication is instant and international, and shipping is cheap and efficient. So it's often cheaper to buy something from the other side of the world and get it shipped to you than to buy from a local store. Consumers basically beginning to research the best deals online before buying. Even savvy consumers will research the best deal and then take that price to their local supplier and offer them the business if they can match the price they get online. This is actually a very smart way to get cheap deals. This has basically mean an increased competition. So if you want to supply goods and services, you really need to compete in this global marketplace. If you are selling a product or a service, you need an online presence because people will research it first. That tends to be how they find out about your services and then compare it to other people. So using things like Facebook or your own website or any other sort of social media allows you to establish your presence in the marketplace and get feedback from customers. This has meant that the differences between regions are eroding. You can buy your product or service from anywhere in the world. It tends to mean you get very similar products everywhere. Businesses call this the McDonaldization of products, which basically means that wherever you go in the world, you know what you're going to get. Several social and ethical influences have had on business as well. Businesses in the current climate tend to be addressing themselves as green aware. That means they put environmental issues before business decisions or in front of business decisions. Government regulation requires this as well. Any new development has to have an environmental impact study completed before it can be approved to go ahead. And particularly, a lot of consumers now want more green-friendly products. It becomes a marketing campaign as well, allow you to differentiate your services and your products from your competitors. Allied to this is the fair trade ethics. People don't want to buy things that have been made by child labour or from sweatshop labour, and it's a way that companies can differentiate themselves from their competitors by pointing out that they don't use child labour or sweatshop labour. Also, businesses tend to need to be more family friendly. Changed employment conditions allow you a better work-life balance, but this is dependent on how valuable is an employee to the business. So people at the lower end of the financial scale tend not to get family-friendly employment conditions, but people with the knowledge workers, people with key skills that businesses need, tend to be able to dictate how family-friendly their work conditions are. There are several legal influences on the business. Obviously, there are compliance costs. What this means is that there's a financial cost to making sure that you obey the law. For example, if you previously mentioned environmental impact study, businesses have to pay for that themselves, but it's a legal requirement before they can go ahead with the development. That is a compliance cost. These costs ensure regulation, compliance with regulations, but they include things like health and safety, equal employment opportunities, environmental protection, and anti-discrimination. Businesses are required to show that they comply with these. Furthermore, another legal influence clearly in Australia is the Trade Practices Act, which details how businesses can sell and advertise their services. For example, the key part of that act is that they're not allowed to have misleading advertising practices, and also that products must be sold in Australia must be fit for their purpose. There's a number of political influences, and you can find more details about this on page 60 of the textbook. But basically, political influences influencing business include labour market reforms, decentralising the wage and determinations, has been a key influence over the last 20 years in Australia, whereas prior to that most wages were set by a wage bargaining body. Now a lot of people are free to determine their own wages and negotiate with their own employers. There's still organisations like the New South Wales Teachers Federation um, that help set wages for standard teachers. The teachers themselves don't need to negotiate with their schools how much they're going to get paid. New taxation, so there things like goods and services tax that were applied in the late 90s, adding 10% on the cost of many products and services that people buy. That's changed the way business is being run. It also has a compliance cost because businesses need to report on the amount of GST that they collect every quarter. So every 3 months they have to send in a business activity statement to the Australian Tax Office that details how much GST they've collected and sending them a cheque. Basically, there have been some social reforms from the government as well. The recent introduction of paid parental leave has made a significant change to people's working conditions, making people much more willing to take time off to attend to children because they receive 6 months paid parental leave from it. There are a number of institutional influences on business that come from either government at the federal, state and local level, where governments apply regulatory bodies. So, for example, on the federal level, Department of Environment and Conservation is a federal office, but the Office of Fair Trading is a state office for New South Wales. The Australian Securities Investment Commission and the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission are federal bodies that regulate companies and businesses and regulate trade practices. So the ACCC has been set up to regulate the Trade Practices Act. Other things within the state and local bodies include employee trade associations, trade unions where employees can be a member of to help bargain for conditions, and the Australian Stock Exchange, which regulates the buying and selling of shares in companies. The federal government obligations include, basically you must pay taxes to the Australian Tax Office, both sole traders all the way up to corporations. Every year they must submit a tax return that determines how much tax is being paid and how much is due to be paid. And the government refunds the difference if you've paid too much tax, or they send you a bill if you haven't paid enough. Employers must also provide each employee with just over 9% of their wages as superannuation paid into a regulated fund and saving for their retirement. Federal government oversees customs regulations, so the import and exportation of goods into and out of Australia as a federal matter. And the state government provides legislation on oversight of provision of employee entitlements, for example, including workers' compensation, occupational health and safety services, and award rates of pay and entitlements, typically for the lower paid workers in our communities. Payroll tax is a tax levied by state governments on companies, and it's a percentage of their annual payroll. It's paid to the state government. They also ensure that companies and businesses are abiding by relevant state legislation, Trade Practices Acts, employment conditions, and administering things like environmental emissions and pollution controls. The local government, however, has responsibility for approving and oversight of developments. So anyone who wishes to develop a new business or a new building needs to get development approval. They oversee things like fire regulations, parking regulations, and basically some, strangely enough, business signage. Other key influences on the local businesses include the ease of entry into a market for a new business. Typically online businesses have a fairly easy entry into a marketplace because there's a limited amount of capital required to set up these businesses. However, a new cafe or a new restaurant has a fairly capital intensive setup process where they need to fit out the premises and then trade for a significant amount of time until they build up goodwill in the business and get a sufficient turnover to start making a profit. Other factors include things like the number of competitors. If you're trading online, you have almost an unlimited number of competitors and you need to find a way to stand out amongst them. However, a local restaurant has a limited number of competitors, typically in their own local community, and they can find it relatively easy to differentiate themselves from their competitors. They also would have limited impact from foreign competition because obviously you're not going to travel overseas to have dinner. whereas you can go down to your local shopping centre or down to the local shopping strip and have dinner. Other factors influencing your competitors are marketing strategies employed by your competitors. If you've an established business as a new competitor on the market, they might adopt a strategy where they're going to trade at a loss to try and establish market share, which will impact you and your business as they trade on price. You start losing sales, start losing amounts of your market.